I was looking for a weekend getaway, somewhere peaceful, far from the noise of the city. I needed a break. That's when I found the perfect Airbnb listing, a charming old house on Oak Street in a small town a few hours away. The photos made it look cozy, with its vintage furniture, wooden floors, and a large garden in the back. It was everything I wanted, quiet, secluded, and full of character. I booked it immediately. The owner, Mrs. Thompson, seemed friendly in her messages. She told me the house had been in her family for generations, and she hoped I would treat it with care. She also mentioned that she wouldn't be around, but the keys would be in a lockbox by the door. When I arrived, it was just starting to get dark. The house looked exactly like the pictures, maybe a bit older, a bit more worn. The front yard was overgrown, with wildflowers spilling over the path leading to the porch. I could feel the weight of the house's age as I stood in front of it, the history it carried. I found the lockbox, retrieved the keys, and stepped inside. The air was cool and still, with the faint scent of wood and something I couldn't quite place. The house was quiet, too quiet maybe, but I shrugged it off. It was, after all, what I had come here for. After unpacking, I decided to explore the house. The furniture was as old as the house itself, creaking under my weight as I moved from room to room. There were paintings on the walls, portraits of people who looked like they had lived in a different century. Their eyes seemed to follow me as I walked by. The kitchen was small but functional, with an old stove and a fridge that hummed loudly in the silence. There were no modern appliances here, no microwave, no dishwasher. It felt like stepping back in time. Upstairs, there were 3 bedrooms. The largest one, which I assumed was the master bedroom, had a large 4-poster bed draped with heavy curtains. The other 2 were smaller, with single beds and old-fashioned quilts. I chose one of the smaller rooms for myself, not wanting to sleep in the master bedroom. Something about it made me uneasy. That first night, I slept fitfully. The house was too quiet, and every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind outside made me jump. I kept feeling like there was someone else in the house with me, watching me, but every time I turned on the light, there was nothing. Just shadows. The next day, I decided to spend some time in the garden. It was overgrown, but in a charming way, with tall grass and wildflowers everywhere. I found an old bench under a large oak tree and sat there for a while, enjoying the peace and quiet. The town was small, and there were no sounds of traffic, no people passing by. It was just me in the house. As the day wore on, I started to notice something strange. The garden was beautiful, but no matter where I went, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. It wasn't just a feeling anymore, it was a certainty. I looked around, but there was no one there. Just the house, standing silent behind me. That night, things got worse. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of footsteps. They were soft, slow, and they were coming from the hallway outside my room. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I listened, trying to convince myself that it was just the house settling, just the wind. But then the footsteps stopped, right outside my door. I held my breath, waiting for something to happen, but nothing did. The silence stretched on, suffocating, until I finally worked up the courage to get out of bed. I crept to the door and opened it slowly, my hand shaking. The hallway was empty. I checked every room, every corner of the house, but there was no one there. I even went outside, circling the house with a flashlight, but there was nothing. No footprints, no sign that anyone had been there. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, I called Mrs. Thompson. I told her about the footsteps, about the feeling of being watched. She was quiet for a long time before she finally spoke. "I'm sorry," she said. "I should have told you. The house, it has a history." She explained that the house had belonged to her great-grandparents, and that her great-grandmother had died there under mysterious circumstances. Some people in the town believe the house was haunted, that her great-grandmother's spirit still lingered, watching over the house, protecting it. "But I've never believed in those stories," Mrs. Thompson said quickly. "I'm sure it's just the old house making noises. It's nothing to worry about." But I couldn't shake the feeling that it was something more. The footsteps, the eyes I felt on me, it all felt too real. I told her I wanted to leave, but she insisted that I stay, that everything would be fine. That night, the footsteps came again. This time, they didn't stop at my door. They moved through the house, slowly, deliberately. I could hear them downstairs, in the living room, in the kitchen. Then they came up the stairs, closer and closer, until they were right outside my room again. I didn't move. I just lay there, frozen, listening. The footsteps stopped, and then, slowly, the door to my room began to creak open. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I just stared at the door as it opened wider and wider until I could see into the hallway. There was no one there, but the door kept opening, slowly, until it was fully open. Then, just as slowly, it began to close again. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. By the third day, I was exhausted, jumpy, and desperate to leave. I packed my things and left the house without looking back. I didn't care about the rest of my reservation or the money I'd lose. I just wanted to get away from that place. When I got home, I left a review for the Airbnb. Beautiful house, but not for the faint of heart. If you believe in ghosts, you might want to stay somewhere else. I never heard from Mrs. Thompson again, and I never went back to Oak Street. But sometimes, when I'm lying in bed at night, I think about that house. I wonder if her great-grandmother is still there, watching, waiting. And I wonder if anyone else has heard those footsteps in the dark. It was supposed to be a quiet weekend getaway with friends. We'd been talking about it for months, excited to escape the busy city and unwind in a secluded cabin deep in the woods. When the weekend finally arrived, the five of us, me, Sarah, Ethan, Lily, and Jake, packed our bags, loaded up the car, and set off for the mountains. The drive was long, winding through narrow roads surrounded by thick trees, but we didn't mind. We were all looking forward to spending time together, with no distractions and nothing to worry about. When we finally arrived at the cabin, it was already late afternoon. The cabin was simple, rustic even, but cozy. It had everything we needed: a small kitchen, a living room with a fireplace, and 2 bedrooms upstairs. The moment we stepped inside, a chill ran down my spine. It wasn't cold, actually. It was quite warm inside, but there was something about the air. It felt heavy, like the walls were holding a secret. I brushed the feeling aside, chalking it up to the isolation. After all, we were miles away from the nearest town. We unpacked, settled in, and spent the evening cooking dinner, playing board games, and laughing around the fireplace. It was exactly what we had wanted. No phones, no internet, just us and the wilderness. But as the night wore on, I started to notice strange things. It began with the noises. Soft, almost imperceptible at first, like footsteps outside the cabin. I thought it might be an animal, a deer, or maybe a fox, but the sound was too deliberate, too human. I glanced out the window but saw nothing, just the dark trees looming outside. The others didn't seem to notice, so I kept quiet. Later that night, after we'd all gone to bed, I woke up to the sound of something scratching at the window. It was faint, but persistent, like nails scraping against the glass. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, too scared to move. My heart was pounding in my chest, and every instinct told me not to look. But eventually, curiosity got the better of me. I turned over and slowly lifted my head to look at the window. There was nothing there, just the empty woods beyond the glass. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding and tried to calm myself down. Maybe it had just been the wind or a branch brushing against the cabin. I forced myself to go back to sleep, but it wasn't easy. The next morning, I mentioned the noise to the others, but they all brushed it off. "It's just the woods," Ethan said with a grin. "You're not used to all the sounds out here." Maybe he was right. Maybe I was just letting my imagination get the best of me. But the feeling of unease wouldn't go away. That day, we spent our time hiking through the forest, exploring the area around the cabin. The woods were dense, with tall trees that blocked out most of the sunlight. It was easy to get lost, but Jake had brought a map, and we made sure to stick together. At one point, we stumbled upon an old abandoned shack. It was falling apart, with rotting wood and broken windows, but something about it drew us in. We approached cautiously, peering inside through the open doorway. The interior was dark, with only a few beams of light filtering in through the cracks in the walls. There was a strange smell, musty, but with something else underneath, something that made my stomach turn. There were old rusted tools scattered on the floor, and in the corner, a pile of torn clothes covered in dirt and leaves. "Let's get out of here," Lily said, her voice uneasy. We all agreed, and quickly left the shack behind. As we walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, had been watching us from the shadows. That night the noises returned. This time, they were louder. Footsteps outside the cabin, moving around the perimeter. Scratching at the windows, more insistent than before. I wasn't the only one who heard it now. Sarah woke up too, and we both sat in the dark, listening. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me in the darkness. "Yeah." We lay there for what felt like hours, too scared to move, until finally, the noises stopped. In the morning, we told the others, but Ethan and Jake still weren't convinced. "It's just animals," Jake said. "The woods are full of them, but I knew it wasn't animals." And as the day went on, the tension between us grew. Everyone was on edge, snapping at each other over little things. The carefree weekend we had planned was quickly unraveling. That evening, we decided to build a fire outside. We sat around it, trying to relax, but the woods felt different now. The trees seemed closer, the shadows darker. Every rustle of leaves, every crack of a branch made us jump. As we sat there in uneasy silence, I saw something out of the corner of my eye, a figure, standing just beyond the tree line. It was tall, too tall to be a person, with long limbs and a twisted, unnatural shape. I blinked, and it was gone. "Did you see that?" I asked, my voice shaking. "See what?" Ethan replied, looking around. "There was someone over there," I said, pointing toward the trees. Lily looked where I was pointing, her face pale. I saw it too. We all stood up, huddling together as we peered into the darkness. But whatever it was gone now. "Let's go inside," Sarah said, her voice trembling. No one argued. That night was the worst. The noises didn't stop this time. The footsteps, the scratching, the faint sound of something or someone whispering just outside the walls of the cabin. We all heard it. We all stayed awake, sitting together in the living room with every light on, waiting for the dawn. When morning finally came, we didn't waste any time. We packed our bags, loaded up the car, and left the cabin behind. None of us said a word as we drove away, but we all knew we'd never come back. I don't know what we experienced in those woods, and I don't think I want to know. But every now and then, when I'm alone at night, I hear the sound of footsteps, soft and slow, moving just outside my window. And I wonder if whatever was in those woods followed us home. I never believed in cursed objects or haunted things. Those were just stories, right? But that changed when I found the mirror. It all started when I moved into my new apartment. It was a small place, nothing fancy, but it had a certain charm that I liked. The building was old, with creaky floors and high ceilings, and it was filled with all sorts of strange, antique furniture left behind by previous tenants. The mirror was one of those things. I found it in the bedroom, leaning against the wall. It was tall and ornate, with a dark wooden frame carved into intricate patterns of leaves and vines. The glass was old, a little cloudy, with spots where the silver backing had worn away. But despite its age, it had a certain elegance to it, like it had once been a beautiful piece. I decided to keep it. For the first few weeks, everything was fine. I settled into my new place, made it my own. I didn't even think much about the mirror. It was just another piece of furniture in the apartment. But then, strange things started happening. It began with small, almost imperceptible things. I would catch glimpses of movement in the mirror out of the corner of my eye, but when I looked directly at it, there was nothing there. Just my reflection staring back at me. I told myself it was just my imagination, a trick of the light, and tried to ignore it. But it didn't stop. Soon the reflections started to change. I would see things in the mirror that weren't in the room. Dark shapes, fleeting shadows, things that didn't make sense. I would turn around, expecting to see something behind me, but there was always nothing. Just the empty room. One night, I was lying in bed, half asleep, when I heard a soft whisper. It was faint, barely audible, but it sent a chill down my spine. I sat up, looking around the room, but it was empty. The whisper came again, and this time I realized it was coming from the mirror. I stared at it, my heart pounding in my chest. The reflection in the glass was wrong. It showed my room, but it was different, darker, twisted, like a shadowy version of the real thing. And then I saw it. There was someone standing in the reflection. It was a figure, tall and indistinct, shrouded in darkness. I couldn't make out any details, but I could feel its presence, cold and malevolent. It was watching me. I turned around, my breath catching in my throat, but there was no one there. The room was empty. I looked back at the mirror, and the figure was gone. But the sense of dread lingered, heavy in the air. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt like something was watching me, standing just outside the edge of my vision. The whispering continued, soft and insistent, and I knew it was coming from the mirror. I tried covering it with a sheet, but the whispering only grew louder, more urgent, until I could hear it clearly. It was saying my name. I couldn't take it anymore. The next morning I decided to get rid of the mirror. I dragged it out of the apartment and took it to the nearest thrift store, eager to be rid of it. The clerk didn't seem surprised when I handed it over. If anything, he looked relieved. I went home, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. The apartment felt lighter, less oppressive, and for the first time in weeks, I slept peacefully. But the relief didn't last. A few days later, I started hearing the whispering again, faint at first, like it was coming from far away, but it grew louder each night. I tried to ignore it, tried to tell myself it was all in my head, but deep down, I knew the truth. The mirror hadn't left. Or maybe it hadn't let me go. One night, I woke up to the sound of something shattering. I bolted upright in bed, my heart racing, and turned on the light. The sound had come from the living room. I crept out of bed, fear knotting in my stomach, and when I reached the living room, I saw it. The mirror was there, lying on the floor, its glass cracked and splintered. But that wasn't possible. I had gotten rid of it. I had taken it away. I stood there, frozen, staring at the broken mirror. The whispering had stopped, replaced by a heavy silence that pressed down on me from all sides. And then, slowly, I saw something in the cracked glass. It was my reflection, but twisted, distorted. My face was wrong, stretched into a grotesque smile that didn't belong to me. The eyes in the reflection weren't mine either. They were dark, empty, filled with a cold, mocking laughter. And then, the reflection moved. It stepped out of the mirror, its movements jerky and unnatural, like a puppet with its strings cut. I stumbled back, my mind screaming in terror, but my body wouldn't respond. The thing that looked like me but wasn't me kept coming closer, its twisted smile growing wider. I don't remember much after that, just the sound of glass shattering again and the cold touch of something brushing against my skin. When I woke up, the mirror was gone. The apartment was quiet, almost too quiet. But I knew it wasn't over. I could still feel it, lurking somewhere in the shadows, waiting for the right moment. And every night, just as I'm about to fall asleep, I hear it again. The whispering, soft and insistent, coming from somewhere deep in the darkness. It's still calling my name. And I know, one day, it will find me again,